Welcome to Cash Up, a weekly show where we'll converse with amazing folks in DFIR, and today is no exception. Today I'm joined by Heather Smith, also known as Lit Moose on Twitter. She's a senior digital forensics and incident response consultant at CrowdStrike. She's taught digital forensics as an adjunct at Richland College in Dallas, Texas. She has in-depth experience in DFIR from both a consultancy basis and performing work as an in-house response to corporations. She holds a Master's of Science in Computer Forensics and Counterterrorism from the University of South Florida, as well as a BA in American and British Literature, which is such a cool background. She's also an amazing musician, particularly on the violin. I've had the distinct pleasure of listening to her play impromptu jam sessions, both at conferences and karaoke bars. And with that, I'd like to introduce you all to Heather Smith.
I don't think I've blushed this hard in a while, Jessica, so thank you.
That's my goal. My goal is always to make you blush.
Oh.
I wanted your cheeks to match the dumpster fire background you have behind you.
I was going to say, I'm just going to blend in.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today. And with that great understanding of all of the things you've done and where you come from, I'd really just like if you could tell us how you got here.
Oh my. Well, how many hours do we have? Because it's kind of a long story, but I think I can give the boiled down version. So I'm from Florida. I'm a Florida woman. And when I was in, I feel like this is a disclaimer that should happen at the beginning of the show. So it's good to start here. I am a Florida woman. When I was living in Florida, I was very, very poor. I paid college out of pocket. So that BA in literature took 8.5 years. Because I was paying completely out of pocket. And for those who don't know, if you're under the age of 24, which I was when I was doing most of my undergrad, you can't get FAFSA or federal aid without your parents' tax information. So I fell through those cracks of like, well, do it yourself. So paying rent and paying for tuition and everything was a struggle. So I was working 2 to 3 jobs throughout. I actually started in biochemistry, but switched to literature. It was the only thing that offered all-night courses, and I love literature, don't get me wrong, but it was one of those of, what are my choices here? So, of my career history, I've been a bartender, I was a professional ballroom dance instructor, I was a lifeguard, I was a vet tech for years, I worked in a morgue for a little bit as, not an ME, like that actually takes a lot of schooling, but as a tech that was assisting, I was perfect. So, I had all of these odd jobs, and paying for school got so difficult that I finally took the crunch and I was like, well, what can I get a job in? And I ended up being a recruiter, and this is where some of you will boo, right? Some people boo and they're like, oh, recruiters. Yes, I understand. So that's the funny thing, right? Is they didn't handle any information security jobs when I came in, but they did a lot of tech, and so I slowly started to get to know all the different jobs in tech, and I started matching with certain personalities, and I went, no, I could see myself doing certain things, and I really fell in love with data science, so I started doing data science. But then I started talking to information security people, and I was like, oh my God, these people are just like me. They're weird. We have the same personality and sense of humor. I don't offend them. This is like a first. So I was a technical screener, I had been help desk before, I had been sysadmin, and I switched over to recruiting with this technical background and ended up talking to people. And I really hated, I wasn't commissioned, I wasn't sales side of things. I was just making sure that people fit with the roles. So talking to all of these people, doing all of these different jobs, and I just kept coming back to security, and I was like, why can't I do this? And this was in, I'm not going to age myself, but this was several years before I got into it, and I just started teaching myself. And then I became a project manager at a university, and they let me switch into security because I had such an interest in it and because I started coding. And I started working sysadmin-y stuff, and they made me a database admin. And, I was doing all of these things because at a university, if you can wear the hat and you'll accept the pay for it, usually that's a good thing. Because you need people and you have all these different researchers, and if you can help, you help. And so the tie that brought all of my jobs together was really, I wanted to help people. And I really kept going back to digital forensics specifically in incident response because that was kind of the side of, I got to see people on their worst day when I was working at the morgue.
Right.
And it broke my heart. And I kind of saw that too as a vet tech. And I've always wanted to be in a career where what happens if you can prevent somebody's worst day? And that's kind of what this is
Right.
yes, we see the worst of it in digital forensics because we're coming in post-incident usually. But at our company, we do a lot of compromise assessments too. We do a lot of proactive work. We have an EDR tool to help prevent these things. So like it really jived with my personality and kind of the mission statement that I've had for myself in life, which is if you can prevent, do prevent. And so that was kind of my pathway into this whole thing, and it's shortened, but this happened over years, and it was just a lot of self-study. And actually, the getting into it happened well before the master's degree.
Right.
So,
which of those amazing varied jobs do you think, and it might be all of them, gives you the most leverage in forensics, right? So a lot of those are things that we hear people have backgrounds in, sysadmin, database, etc. But I really am curious how the work as a ballroom dance instructor, or as a vet tech, or as working as a tech assistant in a morgue, how do those frame and shape the types of response that you do every day?
I think all of them really did, and it's funny that you say that and you pick out those two because anybody who dances or anybody who's familiar with the arts, music. I was a professional musician for a while, working for a performing arts center. You have to listen very closely to everything that's going on, and analyze things from more than one angle. And I think that any job that gives you that experience, and it doesn't really matter what the job is,
Yes.
but being able to figure out if you're only looking at it from one point of view, you're almost doomed to fail. So having something that makes you reassess and keep listening, and almost sitting back more than you're active and kind of going through motions, anything that teaches patience. I've got to say the vet tech work, being able to deal with feral cats, very applicable in business. So,
More so as a consultant or in a corporate environment? No, don't answer that.
This is entrapment. I'm going to take it. This is the perfect time to sip my drink.
So I really love your response there because I think it's something people don't really assess, that a lot of times people who have varied experiences develop a lot of the mental mindset that's necessary for this work, and that those things can be very formative to making a better investigator, a better examiner, a better forensicator, and really helping with that growth and development. So I love that you stressed the way you've learned those other skills that are absolutely critical that potentially aren't taught. I definitely don't teach those skills in the classroom at the university, right? We teach how to decode hex, how to find artifacts. And your comment on the music and experience you've had as a professional musician, there was an interesting presentation. I'm not sure if you, I think you were, I know you were there, at D4 Summit by Cindy Murphy. Where
Yes,
she
I love
talked
her.
in what I believe it was 2018. If you go to the DFIR Summit archive page, you should be able to find this. And she did some research, I believe, with Matt Linton, about musicality and how people who perform and have experience as musicians, how that plays and affects their ability as forensicators, and things like how Google provides time for people to actually go play and has jam session rooms. And we've obviously had jam sessions at conferences, and I just think that that's really a unique skill to bring into DFIR. And actually, it's not so unique because there's lots of people who have that musical background who find their way here. And the whole comment about how the arts pertains to this technical work, I think, is brilliant. And it really does show that it takes all different types of backgrounds and experience to make a well-rounded forensicator. Um, There's comments, by the way, that you're an incredible, that it was an incredible journey that you made, and that's coming from Kevin Pagano.
Oh,
Alexis
I
would like
love
to
that.
comment that your background, that you are absolutely broadcasting directly from InfoSec HQ with your dumpster fire behind you, and I love that. There actually was a question from Charlie here. He's asking if you can recall your first forensic case.
Oh,
I know that's
yes, and
deep.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm allowed to necessarily. Let's see. What was my first forensic case? I mean, you never really forget. But I went from security operations center into IR into forensics, and so you see a lot of you just weed out a lot of things. And I think it was something like super simple like struts.
Right.
That was the first for me. That was particularly painful around the Equifax time frame that I worked on. That was actually something of
Of
substance.
substance, right? And
Right, right.
and that's really interesting with the transition from the SOC into incident response into forensics. And I think that's important for people to remember as they're looking for their first role. Sometimes you might not like slot into forensics directly, but
Oh, usually not.
getting
Right,
into the
right.
SOC is a good way to finagle into forensics if that's
I'd
what you
actually
prefer.
recommend it because it's like honestly, you end up appreciating all of the being able to see all of the false positives too. I think that for me was absolutely
Right.
invaluable. Network administration, like it sounds, I mean, to some it might sound boring, but I it has behooved me in more ways than one to have the admin jobs before doing especially the incident response, forensics as well, because you have to be able to know what's normal and what's not, and what might be
Absolutely.
causing a thing. And I would say that gave me it's like putting on a new pair of glasses after you don't know your prescription's expired. All of those experiences help add to it. So,
I think that's really critical what you're saying about knowing normal, because I believe if you come into forensics and you don't have that experience, which I'd never had the experience of working as a in a SOC or a network administrator, and I would say that something that you lack if you go into digital forensics without having spent time in those roles is everything you're responding to is abnormal. So I don't think you have as strong of a basis of knowing what's normal and normal across different environments. So I think that's a really great point that you brought out in terms of how that experience can be strong in a different way.
thanks. And I worry about people too because if you don't have that baseline, doing it on your own machine is kind of how you can teach that if you don't have the sock roll. So like do it to yourself, and find
Yes.
that baseline for yourself because otherwise you can get alert fatigue or like artifact fatigue if you're just forensics. Don't make yourself more tired than you need to be, and kind of self teach there because it really helps.
Absolutely. And you know what you do. So understanding normal on your own, doing your own analysis on your own machines, absolutely great idea. So that's a lot about what you've done before. What are you doing now?
Oh my. All the things all day, every day. The background is really accurate. No, I love what I do. I still do analysis every day. I also lead incidents, so in incident response. So that's end to end. That's anything from calling up and we think we have a problem to assessing, do you really need incident response or maybe is there something else that maybe is advisable? Not just jumping in with both feet anytime that there's a problem, but actually analyzing, what's really needed, what's happening here, all the way to the end step of okay, we've had an incident, now let's do a retrospective and really do some like architecture work. What's some ways that we can shore up an environment? What are some ways to protect people to where this never happens again? Or proactively, some of my favorite work is nothing's happened, come in, see how our infrastructure works, really get to know it from an outside angle, and make some suggestions. And I really enjoy doing that too because security is hard, it's multifaceted, and there is always a hole. There is no such thing as perfect.
And I love that that's your favorite because it really ties into what you said before about how your mission is to keep people from having that worst day. And I think that's really applicable to having your previous experience and wanting to prevent that. You can see that passion that you want to make sure that that doesn't happen to more people and organizations. And I think that's just a fabulous use of forensics because a lot of times we just think of ourselves as going in afterwards and telling the story of what happened so somebody else can fix it. But we can proactively, there are ways and organizations that proactively utilize those skills to keep people from their worst day, right? So that you don't have that dumpster fire. I love that. So, what is your go to resource as you're dealing with all these challenges?
I'm looking at one of them.
Oh,
Um, so
that's too kind.
I no, it's true, it's true, it's true. I am a very spoiled individual, and I'll go into it in depth. So I'm spoiled because I've been with a lot of organizations. I've done security at more than one place, and when I was looking for a job again, CrowdStrike didn't just choose me. I kind of chose them as well. After some research, they really are where I want to be for a very long time, and it's multifaceted. So I have resources that are my teammates, and they're absolutely brilliant individuals. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Abso-freaking-lutely.
And so,
Abso-freaking-lutely.
right, and so I have my teammates, and they're probably my number one resource. They're wonderful individuals, and then we also have different branches of the organization. And I've got to say, I'm really spoiled with our Intel team. So I have a lot of things at my fingertips. If I get bored on the weekend and I want to know about the latest, latest greatest threat that's out there, like I can just read, and I'm a big reader. So like having those tools at my fingertips, absolutely spoiled. But that doesn't mean that I don't still go outside of my organization, and that's why I said you. And some other people. So I talk to Alexis a lot. Alexis, who does iLeap and like builds tools and is constantly up and up on the latest and greatest in mobile forensics. I bug the crap out of Brian Brian Morin. He can validate this. Like I'll go to him both for memes, and then if I have a question, I'm like, hey, what if we did this?
Did you
He
just...
built.
I'm sorry, you go to him for both memes and incident response.
Oh yeah,
I love it. I
absolutely.
love it. I
So,
love it.
for a very brief time, I worked with Brian in between different roles, and it was probably one of the happiest things that I ever did, just because he's a delightful human being. But he built the bitmap parser that matches up bitmap cache images
Right. It's an
based on
amazing tool.
pixelation. Saves so much time, but like that's the kind of resource, just having community and a bunch of people that where their areas of specialty are, and being able to go outside and sanity check yourself. Like I've gone to multiple people multiple times and just done sanity checks of, I'm looking at this artifact, this is what I'm seeing, would you do this any different way? And just making sure that you are not an experience of one, like
Absolutely.
you're not siloing yourself. So my resource is usually people, and just talking to a bunch of people.
I love that. That unlike usually that's not the response I get to that question. I love that you're talking about the humans who really, really help you. It's incredible to think about the resources that we have at our fingertips as we build our networks and relying on other people. And I think you mentioned something really key in terms of peer review, right? Bouncing off the ideas off of other people who have experience is really, really awesome. So Jay Sasparetis, and Jay, I apologize if I mispronounced your name, he wants to know what tools you're using regularly.
Oh my. All of them.
All of
So
the things.
shout out, one of the reasons that I'm actually on this podcast is because I am a magnet user. I love the suite. I use these tools all the time for like full disk images, or even like partial. But I also, I use all of CrowdStrike's tools, again, very spoiled there. And that's proactive too. So I love going in there. They have vulnerability management. They have different modules where you can go in and see different things and gain visibility there. But then one of the more unusual things that I guess it's kind of unusual is I use red team tools as well. So I'm using Bloodhound to get early
Right.
visibility. I'm using, if you find an LSAS dump on a system, what do? You use Mimikatz to parse it
Right.
out. So
Right.
using red team tools
Well,
and being familiar with those. So, things like that, you know, the answer is really multifaceted because I use a lot of different things on a daily basis, but it really depends on what I'm looking at. And even outside of my tooling at CrowdStrike, I'm still using different tools from open source, like Brian's tool that he built for
absolutely.
bitmap parsing,
RW bitmap cache. Absolutely.
things like that. Yep.
No, and that's great. And
So.
I'd say that the key there is you opening your toolbox to invite in things that traditionally aren't called forensics tools, knowing what they do and how they work. But we live for exploits, right? And red team tools are exploits. So if we can find ways, and it's not just even about using them for forensics and incident response and even the proactive way you're using them, but what a great way to test and understand what artifacts are being left behind from the use of those tools and what artifacts they manipulate and change or obliterate when threat actors are acting. So the use of the tools can help multiple ways. It can help you in your investigation, but it can also help you understand some of the ways that actors may be acting and what it would leave behind in your system. So I love.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And I would say, one of the resources I neglected to mention, and I'm sorry, guys, if you're watching this, but my red team, I'm talking to them constantly. So, and I bug the crap out of them. So, one of the best things that I ever did was saying yes to volunteering for CCDC on a red team because,
Oh, nice.
yeah, before I did that, I was strictly kind of in a box. And when I was allowed to torture poor students on a red team, they gave me, here is your Cobalt Strike, have fun. And I was like, I remember the moment I started using it, I was so mad because I had been hit by Cobalt Strike before.
Right.
And when I started using it, I clicked down and it was like, would you like to, there's a little click down and you can send via WMI or you can use PowerShell and there's these options in it. And I was like, get out. It's this
Oh.
easy. No wonder people use this. And I'm just like, I set myself up shells and I'm looking at what the students are doing and I was like, oh, this just isn't fair. Like, weighted against me. So, yeah.
That's really, really cool. I mean, you've actually just inspired me to learn more and play with some more red team tools. This might be to the dismay of my husband because I married a red teamer because yin and yang.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to go learn some of his world. Just kind of moving into a little bit more of your experience, can you share with us about maybe an incident you've responded to or something that was worth sharing in terms of an experience with a case?
Oh man. Yes, absolutely. Let me think of the right one. I see a lot of things. I see a lot of things, and they all leave their mark. But I think one that's worth noting is everybody gets excited when you say APT.
Ooh.
Working right with nation state threats and things like that. Well, there's a reason for it. It's very adrenaline pumping because that's when it kind of shifts from forensics more to incident response and kind of
Right.
plays fluidly between the two. So one that's really notable is when you come in, and this is one for me. Came in, active threat actor, hands on keyboard, doing stuff in the environment they're in. Unfortunately, who had come in before us kind of tipped their hat, and they knew that we were watching. So forensics tools deployed. Threat actor knows time clock's ticking. Somebody's watching us. There's response going on, and so I'm watching actually through CrowdStrike's tool, and I'm watching two different things happen. I see all of these alerts for executables going off, and
Okay.
they're all named different things, and it's like a rename, and I'm like, what is going on? And it's tons of them,
Okay.
just coming up with different names, really interesting names too, like you've never seen them before. And I looked at it and I looked a little bit further. Well, CrowdStrike records the hash for you. And so I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is the same hash. It's
Oh.
the same executable. And it's just name change, but the same
Huh.
executable over and over again on multiple different systems being spammed out. And I was like, oh crap. this is a distraction.
Right.
And so I start looking over here, and I start looking in the Linux environment. Sure enough, I see a script run, and it's very subtle. Somebody has copied a user's mailbox. And on another machine, I see WinSCP drop. And I go, oh crap,
shoot.
Guys, shut it down.
Right now. So you were seeing it live?
Put a bubble on it. Right, seeing it live.
Oh my gosh.
And made the call to put a bubble on it and say, okay, these are the machines we need to look on. Shut this down, start looking at network side, close off, and then slowly open back up because, we've got persistence here. Turned out there was a golden ticket situation. So, knowing, okay, Kerberos has a credential cache on it, you got to double tap it, and the cycle time is 10 hours. So knowing all of those things and seeing the moving parts and being able to respond, that was it's like being on a roller coaster for a few hours, So very adrenaline pumping, very exciting stuff, and that's kind of what I live for. Is that I don't think anybody who works in IR is not an adrenaline junkie in some way, shape, or form, because otherwise they'd probably burn right out. But I love that sort of thing because you're going up against an active adversary, and those wins where you actually block them and stop them from doing that exfil or whatever they're in there to do, that feels really good.
That's so awesome. I love the adrenaline rush that comes to actually seeing the activity live, right? And like you said, you now are in a position to prevent the worst day, but it's because you were there doing the investigation because there was an earlier trigger of the access before the actual momentum. So I think it's great that the client had you there on time and that you were able to respond. So just awesome, really, really, really cool work.
Charlie, well, the best part.
Yeah, go
ahead. I was just gonna say the best part too is that it's not like I was free to kind of pay attention over here because it's when you have the right tools too, the executables weren't successful. It was just noisy. Right. So knowing too, when you have tools in place that blocking is happening, you actually are more free to go and do the response. So that was good. And it was a good experience.
That makes sense too. I mean, it was a really interesting distraction technique to have you focus on what is going on over here. I assume that you analyzed that executable at some point?
Oh, yes.
and it definitively was just noise? Or
pretty much. It was Mimikatz trying to run over and over again. But it was being blocked.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it was just renamed Mimikatz. Yep.
Okay. So script set to rename every time it was blocked to try to push back through, think its name would... Man, all they had to do was add add a digit and get us the hash block. I love it.
It was very creative.
I love it. I love it. That's really, really neat. So there's actually a question here from Charlie Delta. He says that there's a lot of forensic forums. What are your top places to monitor?
That's a really good question. Do I get in trouble for saying Twitter?
No, because that would be my answer too.
That's
right?
Really, that's where I lurk, and I get most of my information from Twitter just based on, I follow two different subsets of folks. I have my forensics follows and everything else. But I also go to DEF CON, I go to ShmooCon, I go to these conferences where it's not just forensics, it's also the red team side of things. So I follow a lot of red teamers, and I get the bug crowd people, seeing what they're finding and exploits. So it's all on Twitter and it's kind of aggregated for me, and so that's where I pay the most attention.
And it's a really good point, because if we're not paying attention to what other people are seeing, how will we know what we're doing response to? And things hit Twitter really quickly. People are very apt to share. It's a great forum. Totally valuable. It's awesome. I mean, I listen to you and what you're putting out there in your tweets as well, right? Because you're sharing a lot of, to be honest, you're sharing a lot of the emotion that goes into the response. Because a lot of times you're not talking about the case, because those details are confidential, but you're talking about the roller coaster you're on and the emotional journey of forensics and incident response live with the rest of the world. And I think that that's immensely valuable for people to understand, because it really is that adrenaline roller coaster, and you really do have those intense days, and then you have those null days, right?
Right, and I have to thank you for that because I feel like I put a bunch of jokes out into the world on Twitter because I'm not allowed to talk about, the inner details of what I'm working on that second. But when I can, I will put out there, hey, I'm seeing this vulnerability being exploited in the wild, please patch, things like that. So hopefully there's some value there too, but mostly joking. So thank you for that, because a lot of times I feel like I get more out of the Twitter community than I give back. So that's cool.
Well, Jay is mentioning specifically that he enjoys the cat pics. So
Yes, please encourage me. That's all I need.
no, but honestly, I think it's a really important understanding of what an examiner goes through and what the life is. And also, you share a lot about life outside. I mean, I've seen you post things on Twitter, everything from you breathing fire to it's true to enjoying beach sunsets to your really, really stressed days where you're like, haven't had a chance to eat, been working this intense case. I just need this moment to say hi and let you all know that I'm still breathing and alive, right? Like, that's important for us all to see. So in even mentioning that, what's something about you outside of incident response, outside of the daily grind of trying to figure out how these guys got into the system?
Oh man.
Guys being a gender neutral term, my apology.
Oh, I do the same thing. So something interesting outside of digital forensics. There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack, but so during all of this quarantine, I've gone through the multiple stages of I'm stuck inside my apartment with my other half and been doing different things and trying to entertain myself in different ways and went kind of down a rabbit hole of I love to cook. And so the I love to cook, but I'm strange kind of merged in a delightful way of I love to cook snails.
Oh, okay,
And
that's
so
unique.
I like escargot,
Okay.
and so it turned into okay. There are all of these different brands of snails on Amazon. I will try them because I can't get fresh snails, and it's snail season. My friend is in Portugal, and so she's sharing all these lovely pictures of her eating snails in snail season, and I'm like, okay, I'm jealous. I should be able to source this. So go on Amazon, and I was like, okay, I'll do test kitchen, but with snails, and I'll get these different brands of snails. And see what's best. Well, I was largely disappointed until a friend of mine.
Can I ask a weird question? I'm so sorry.
Yes.
I know nothing about snails or escargot. When you purchase these snails that you're testing, are they alive or dead?
They're dead.
Okay, that's a very fair question.
No, it is a fair question. I would prefer them to be alive, although it's more work. But the store that you would usually get them from, I'll go to H Mart sometimes.
Okay.
They, I couldn't get there, and I especially didn't want to with quarantine. So trying to stay in, trying to order off of Amazon. So I get these dead snails in cans, already soaked and all the work done for me. I just need to
okay, so what work is done? Do they have shells or they?
Also good question. So they don't.
Okay.
So they come just in a can. Like
so they're prepared.
Right. Think of mushrooms, but not mushrooms. Like this is that's the closest I can get with snails. Is it's kind of like a fungus that's not a fungus.
So snails are fun guys.
Yeah, they are fun guys. Oh, I love this. Oh,
sorry.
No,
I have to go with a pud.
You are feeding into everything that I love right now.
Alexis,
I hope everybody's groaning.
so I must tell you what's coming through is before there were some cat, emojis. Now we've got some snail emojis, no mushroom emojis, and we've got a comment from Alexis that they're just slow-moving mushrooms.
Accurate. Very accurate. Yeah, I pretty much feed them the same. So, no spoilers. I decided that this was not the way to go, and I have a friend. Her name is Pinguino, and she said, "Well, why don't you just raise your own snails, and you can then have fresh snails?" And I was like, "That is a brilliant, horrible idea that gives me a new hobby that I should not have." Especially because I knew at this time that I was going to be moving to New York eventually, and I was like, but then I'll be moving with snails, and I just went, no, I need a hobby. So got a tank, ended up researching everything there is to know on snail husbandry, and kind of what snails did, because
I'm sorry. I'm
I
sorry. So not only are you raising snails, but if I'm
yes.
correct in this, you're mating snails to produce
Oh
more
yes.
snails.
Oh,
Okay.
oh yeah. No,
Yeah.
no, no. So I have essentially, so I live in LA. I can't have chickens where I live. I live kind of close to a beach here. Uh, and so I was like, but I can be a farmer of snails. My little tank. And I was like, there are snails outside that are garden snails. And they were like, these are the snails you eat. So I'm researching, and it's like, there's no reason that I can't eat this snail if I feed it organically. But then I don't have any more snails. So I was like, well, this has to be like, a self-perpetuating system of, I do no work, these snails that I capture at first, because I'm a snail kidnapper, is these snails are meant to make me babies, and then I eat their babies. That sounds really terrible, but that's
No, I
really
mean,
the goal.
so in all honesty, it's
Yeah,
no different than breeding livestock, just you're breeding snails. And
correct.
you do this inside your apartment. So this is an urban livestock-ish growth where you're breeding snails and then you breed them and then you are eating the babies. So how long a process is that? There has been comments here about that you're running The Bachelor with snails. That raising
Not
snails is a
wrong.
slow process, and and then
It
there were
is a
some
slow
comments I'm
process.
not going to share that I probably should have blocked if I was remembering. But there's that I have that power right now because
Oh, good. My people are on. That's what that says to me.
so
Excellent. I love it.
so the question that I have is how long does it take you then from the time you started snail farming to the time that you have a source of snails that you can use in recipes? I don't know how long the birthing time is, how old they have to grow before they're edible, and if you're getting a constant recycling, do you have to save some of the babies to become new mamas and papas, or
So we're not quite there yet. I learned
oh,
that this is a very slow process.
slow
Very
process,
slow
go
process.
figure.
God, it's such a slow process. And I've also been accused by my other half that the snails eat better sometimes than I do. And it's accurate. They get organic vegetables, and I love them very much. Not the snails. Well, yes, I do dote on them. They have not been named. They will not be named. They are farm. I do have isopods, though, that are cleanup crew they're so cute. But so what I'm really hearing as a question from the audience is, tell me about snail sex, and if I interpret that correctly, and snails are hermaphroditic, and apparently, I got 4 of them, so I was like, all right, guys, do your thing. But apparently, it takes 2 weeks after they do that to kind of make babies, and
Okay.
I talk to these snails very very dotingly every day. Come on, guys, make me some children, and they just don't. So I'm kind of Jewish momming them at this point.
You're guilting
Uh,
your snails into having
oh yes,
babies?
oh absolutely, yeah. And I know how that feels, just so you know. But yeah. So I'm trying to guilt my snails, which are behind me and they can hear me right now. They really need to make me children. You're watching this, aren't you? Ha ha ha. My other half just came in the room and gave me the most terrible look. He's got the YouTube up.
And just to the audience, we have all, I think those of us who are watching, we've all done twisted cases, and we have very dark sense of humor. So
Oh,
I do appreciate it. Ryan's commenting that this was not a topic he expected when he tuned in today. So just bringing it back to forensics, I like to make sure that we explore the people behind the forensicator. Do you feel that snail farming has assisted you in your work in incident response in any way?
um,
Any
probably,
parallels?
probably not. I should probably never parallel my clients with my snails. I like to keep that separation there.
But that's
You
important,
know,
right? We all need something outside of DFIR. And I'm glad that you
yes.
found something that works for you in an urban environment and still provides you with a delicious treat, but that you get to learn a new skill that's very unique. So that's great. So
Also, I have to thank everybody for putting up with my trolling this morning, because really the goal here was to see if my other half was listening, and that did it. So,
oh my gosh.
100%.
So moving a little bit back into the digital forensics side, what advice would you give to someone who's looking to get into the field? A lot of times we have listeners who are new to the field.
Oh goodness. Well, first, the one thing I can say is there's no wrong way. There is no wrong path. You can't. If you look at yourself and you're like, I'm just a bartender, or I'm just, I'm a server, I'm a lifeguard, I'm a whatever.
Can I
These are
encourage
all.
people to take the just out of their vocabulary?
That is
Never,
very.
I mean, you're talking about what people internally say to them, but
Yes,
anytime you say, I am just, you're diminishing what you're doing and what it's setting you up for.
that's so
Because when you
accurate.
were doing that work, when you were bartending and when you were a morgue technician, what were you doing? You were spending 8 years to get through and get your bachelor's. So you were doing the steps that were necessary to get there. The bottom step in our ladders are the foundation. Without that, we don't get off the ground. So I just ask everybody to never just. I'm sorry. Please
No,
continue.
no, no. That was the best commentary, and it's so true because I've worked with people who have said, and I get this a lot from people who are outside of the industry. Wow, that sounds so cool. I really wish I could do what you do. And I'm like,
You
well,
can.
yes, you can.
Yes.
Yes. Here, let me do this thing, and I usually ask a few questions of, what do you enjoy doing in your spare time? And for me, growing up, I really loved the Zelda games, and I was that person who was like, I'm going to 100% Ocarina of Time and get all the heart pieces and all the little
Yes.
spiders and everything else. And I found out, oh, look, that obsession with finding all the things, it translates perfectly into this life. And so, like, if you
Yes.
find that you have the personality type that kind of fits in different places in information security, which there are different personalities even between like red teaming and DFIR, you know, people who speed run video games, I'm like, nah, red team.
Right.
But people who are like obsessive, like all the achievements, like they fit great in DFIR, and so just encouraging people like that. There's no wrong way, and there's no wrong experience. And I think that getting into it, the best advice I can give is, treat yourself to the fire hose of information, but
Yes.
but don't let yourself get overwhelmed. Set small goals. So, okay, this week I'm going to learn something new about network architecture. How does this work? And really using yourself and your home environment as a test bed is probably the best thing to give yourself experience without, if your employer is, or if your current job is not such that you are in the field you want to be in, create that environment at home. And we work in such a great field that you can really almost replicate what we do in your own home, in VMs, you can image your own system, you can set up your own network, you can create your own firewalls, play with a pie hole and filter your traffic, get rid of all ads, and there are benefits to it too. So, your rewards for, right, get rid of all ads. The benefits to learning these new things too will come through in the things that you treat yourself to at home. So,
I love that because there's two things you said. One, when you were talking about Zelda, you really reminded me even of my own gameplay as a child. And I think one of the key things there was the problem solving that was involved in trying to collect them all, right? In like the Pokemon method of I'm going to earn every single trophy, quote unquote, that I can earn in this game, every gem. And in doing that, it forces you to solve the puzzles that are mentioned or talked about in different ways. And I mean, I used to remember, like, I'd try to solve things, and I never even related my playing of Zelda to my forensics. But then I would get excited because I'd borrow somebody else's copy of, like, Game Informer. And they would talk about how they solve things. I didn't want to read anything that would spoil, but then they'd talk about how they solve things. I'd be like, oh, I did it a different way, and I'd get all excited. And that is such a parallel to how we do things in forensics. I'd get excited because I'd learn a different way to do the same thing. And it's such a great parallel, and I think it's the puzzle solving. The other thing you said there that I really love is your emphasis on self-study and creation of lab. Mike Williamson says he totally agrees, and that playing around with random stuff has led to real skills that he has on his CV, and he
that's
gives
awesome.
AWS as an example. And I would
Yes.
say that if you're don't have the fortune of currently working in DFIR and you're playing with your own lab and doing those things and building that experience, to echo what Mike is saying, that is something that still can go on your CV, right?
Oh,
Just
absolutely.
because you're not paid for it, if you have experience with it and you can demonstrate that, that is so valuable. So what is your advice to folks who are self-studied and are looking to break into the career once they've built that skill or put together that self-syllabus and feel like they're ready to get some hands-on in either law enforcement or corporate or consultancies, etc.? How do they kind of migrate from that self-study into a career?
That's a really good question. And again, no wrong answers here. And we have a
Absolutely.
lot of different personality types. And I think that one of the toughest things is putting yourself out there, especially because a lot of us are introverts. Um, but I think that the thing to remember in this is that none of us are an island. And the,
Yes.
the best thing you can probably do is remember two things. One, you'll never be ready. There is no such thing as
Never.
ready. you
Never.
you are never prepared enough, you are never ready, you are never, at 100% of I am going to go be awesome at DFIR now. No, you
Nope.
will be learning every day for the rest of your life, especially in
That's
this
what's
field.
so amazing. If you love to learn every
So,
day, if you're the kind of person who wants to learn the job and then just do the job, this is not for
yep.
you. If you are somebody who wants to be challenged every day learn about something new, learn about a new artifact, learn about a new attack, and always feel overwhelmed in a way that's exciting, like, join us because you're as
Yes.
twisted as we are.
Well, and that's the thing that I would say you say the best is join us. Like it doesn't matter how long somebody has been in this field. We're kind of down to earth folks. We don't fight.
Yes.
Um, when you feel like you get to a point where even in the beginning steps, tag team, peer review things that you're doing. Know that if you're setting up a VM in a certain way, you think to yourself, and I did this a lot, and it's called imposter syndrome, of I don't have
Absolutely.
anything to teach, I don't have anything to give back. That's not true at all. You can give a conference talk on the things that you're doing in your home lab that a lot of people either have forgotten, maybe never touched. None of us are experts in all the things.
No.
So just know that the work you're doing in your home lab and the things that you're researching, you can actively be teaching back and working with other people, and that will help solidify those skills and also make the connections that you might need in order to get that first job, either in a security operations center, being a network admin, or even transitioning directly into IR. So,
And that's a really good point too, right? Because we all do this work and we think we have to be up here to share. I'm never going to be up there, right? Like there's there's almost like this roller coaster, right? You start in digital forensics and you know nothing and you're overwhelmed and you look at everybody else around you and you're like, oh my God, they know so much. And then you learn stuff and you learn stuff and you learn stuff and you climb up that slope. And for me, around the 2 year mark and what I've seen with people I've worked with, about 2 years in, you're like, okay, I know how to do this job. And then you work a case and it fucking humbles you. Excuse my language, I shouldn't have said that on there. It humbles you and you drop down to this level where you realize I know nothing and you feel like you did your first day, and then you slowly for the rest of your career live it like this I have 5% of the knowledge place, because the more you learn the more you realize you don't know, and that humbling makes you a better forensicator. And I've seen that pattern over and over and over again. But the whole thing is oh yeah, I know, I'm sorry, Charlie. uh, yeah, Mike Williamson said they're going to bleep that out for the 7 p.m. broadcast. I actually, I don't, normally I have I have Kevin here, and he does all of the handling of all of the technical stuff. He produces the show, and he's on vacation this week, and so I'm self-producing, and obviously that's not going to go well. So I'm sure that will be bleeped for the final cut. But and I miss you, Kevin.
I have a sticky note in front of me. Like, I just want to give you an out right now, that says, Heather, don't say these words. Like, I look down and I look at it, but it's been my reminder throughout this because, one, it's earlier morning here in LA, and two, like, I have to I'm just, I'm glad you did it first because I was so afraid that
Usually I'm so good. The part of this might be that Heather and I are actually good friends, and we sit down and talk together all the time, and we could chat for hours. And in those environments, I may be more comfortable to use expletives. So I greatly apologize to everyone who is listening. I am sorry the Marine in me came out, and please just know that that was passion. And Castle 228 commented that that was passion as well. So just know that I love you all and that I apologize for that.
DFIR people are very passionate. This language exists.
So you mentioned something else too. You mentioned that this is good for people who are transferring or transitioning from a traditional forensics role to IR, and we see this a lot as people retire out of law enforcement and they move into a second career, or they've done government investigations, or they've done more insider investigations, human resources investigations, and they move from that team to an incident response team, or they're ready for that growth in their career. Do you have any thoughts or advice for people who are doing that transition?
Yes, and I'm just going to start out by saying that I respect that it can't be easy. It is incredibly difficult because it's almost a completely different mindset, and everything that you're taught about, evidence handling and, the process almost has to completely do a shift, because in incident response, the motivations change and the, kind of the risk reward changes a little bit. So I would say, talk to your friends in incident response. That's number one, is lean on people who are doing it, and talk through different scenarios. Work through, ifs and because. So if I have this case, I do this because. If this is happening, this is the reaction because. And the reason I say that is because the shift between I have a full disk image and I'm going to go through this and then give my findings is not something that necessarily happens very often in incident response. You've got a full disk image that's processing over here.
Mm-hmm.
You have active firewall logs that are coming in. You have an EDR tool, endpoint detection and response tool, that's giving you active alerts. You might have somebody active in the environment. You're shutting that down. You still have your full disk image over here. You start looking at registry key changes, or you're looking at memory here, and you're pivoting back and forth, and it's like all of a sudden something that was this nice and organized process just goes right out the window and becomes a giant dumpster fire. And it's getting yourself used to and comfortable. The chaos is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have data loss, if you don't capture a machine, if they re-image it, that's also okay too. And knowing that the goal in the situation is driven by the client you're serving. So I'll give an example. One of the questions I ask from the get-go is, what are your goals? And I might ask that question a few times during an incident response of what's most important. Well, most important is getting this system back online.
Right.
Okay, how do we do that? The most important thing might not be analyzing patient 0 right now, but getting the NAS back up and running, because business has to go on. So it's kind of going and juggling that. I'm doing forensics and I'm looking at what caused the problem because I don't want it to happen again, but also balancing the, I got to put my architect hat on now and say, okay, this is what we think happened, or we can see that there was an LSAS dump, so we have to shore up these things. We have to do some resets. We have to act now, in order to keep the ball rolling. And so it's not linear.
I would say that I did a transition from a government lab to consulting and doing IR, and then back into a government lab. And I would say that for me, back in that time, and I was a much younger forensicator at that time, much more junior to the field when I made that transition. For me, one of the hard things was I would create this plan of in-depth analysis, and I wouldn't get to execute on it because the very targeted stuff I did very quickly, looking at a specific register key, etc., provided all we needed to close the hole. And that was my function, right? My function was to find what was needed in order to act, to respond. And in that role, I think that was my frustration, because having come from a very in-depth lab where my job was a post-mortem analysis that had to be very extensive and thorough, I'd have this entire plan of everything else I would do to prove the bad. But in this role in incident response, it wasn't my job to prove the bad. It was my job to identify the bad so it could be stopped. And so I really feel emphasis on there that is the big mental change. But I think the cool thing to remember is it's a lot of the same skills. So people shouldn't be intimidated. They just need to change their thought process. And I think that's really, really great. You
Well,
mentioned,
I think,
go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say one of the things you can do to kind of put yourself in that mindset, which is very uncomfortable and it's almost a form of self torture,
Mm-hmm.
is, you know, have a friend watch you and shoulder surf while you're doing forensics and ask you a million questions while you're doing it and encourage that, because that will most replicate. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm saying it's a good thing. I actually like it when I'm working with a client and they do this. But I will pull up a system and live go through processes with them and go, there's a back and
I
forth
love
that
that.
happens that doesn't necessarily happen in traditional forensics, and work with a friend or somebody else in the field to do that peer process and get yourself used to that question and answer. And I think that might be the most play-by-play that you can do to prepare yourself for that transition.
I think that's so important too, that if you are transitioning, if you can do a collaboration project, even with somebody else who you know in the field who's an IR, and this all goes down to people, and you can come up with that project or research you can do together, you can have that back and forth with an incident responder and pick something outside of your comfort zone to research and present and work on and try to share with the community, either in a blog or a conference or whatnot. If you do that collaboration, I love collaborating with other forensicators because we learn so much from each other. We learn when we're sharing what we know, but then we learn from the questions people ask that open up the holes in what we thought we knew, and then we learn from them when they share what they know, and it's incredible. Brian wanted to share, Brian Moran's listening, and he wanted to share that he was kind of going through the experience of being an IR. He says, and you're missing anything from 17 key systems that you were told were already provided. 6 systems were wiped and restored already, and 11 others were destroyed. Totally had that happen. I had a team in another country that was supposed to image a device, and instead they wiped it. I mean, we've all had, and they were like, here's your image of the most critical system. And they're like, but that's okay because now the machine is wiped for that user. so, we all have that.
Yeah.
Brian mentions that you have to learn to work with what you have to. You're also
Exactly.
over the allotted hours, and you still have to write reports on this and 3 other separate cases. And I think he's spot on about kind of the stress there, which you know way better than me. I did not spend the amount of time and depth in that field. Another key thing you said was you mentioned that there's a lot of introverts in this field, and I've really noticed something really interesting about this period where we're not in person, and that we're all doing typed and written communication. And to me, I feel like it's allowed me to become closer and have better interaction with some examiners who prefer textual communication. And I kind of want your thoughts. And, to be honest, on Thursday, so in 2 days, I'm doing a panel with your boss, with Shelly, or your coworker.
Coworker.
And a coworker. I don't know the rules. I know she's in like a different type of role. With your coworker Shelly, who you did a presentation with at MVS, and Mitch Kaiser, and we're talking about how labs have. Oh, your cat's here. Hi, kitty.
Yeah.
Um, Everybody's got to be happy that the cat showed up for the end. And I'm really, really excited to hear how your organization, and Shelley will be sharing some of this, is reacting to COVID-19. And the title of the talk is Social Distancing While Forensicating. But there's also this people element of how we're communicating with each other, our fellow forensicators in this time, and building our relationships. And I've got to say, like, I got the most personal touch from you. Heather personally sent me a postcard of a zebra, and it made my heart melt, because having that touch when we're in a world that's very different, meant so much to me. It's actually right to my left on not my chalkboard, my pin board here. And so I kind of want your thoughts really, really briefly on how this current environment where we're not traveling to do our cases, we're not going to conferences, we're not seeing each other in person. What are the good things that are coming out of our relationships and communication styles with each other as forensicators from this?
So, I mean, so many good things. And it's hard too. So hi Kat. I used to have an office that I went into here in LA, and I know we're all hurting because we liked seeing each other. We liked
Mm-hmm.
being, in person with each other. We liked having lunch together. But now we've kind of shifted that to web conferencing, to
Mm-hmm.
where we make time as a team to sit down and not talk about work. And
That's awesome.
we web conference with each other, and have food, or like, talk about, what's going on in our lives. We get on and we share our pets. This happens a lot. We get on and see what somebody's cooking. And it's allowed us, because we're global already and we're largely remote. So we kind of had this before, a little bit of practice before, of us largely being remote, of, I have friends that I talk to every day, and I say friends even though they're coworkers and teammates. They've become
Absolutely.
friends, that are in the UK, where I end up working stupid hours, and it's my own fault, not my company's. Where I'm online and they're saying, good morning, you haven't gone to sleep yet, have you? And I'm saying, no, no, I haven't. How did you know? So it's these relationships that normally would be impeded by distance, and maybe you're siloing yourself to your local team or your local client, where everybody's getting used to this world of, it doesn't matter where we are in locale, we can be just as close in kind of what we share, even personally. And that personal touch, I think, and being able to talk outside of what we do, is just so important.
I love
um,
that. I love that, right? We've got to find the good in this. And you're right, we're able to build better relationships with our remote colleagues than we ever had before because we've learned how to do it better. And I actually love being part of a meeting in Amsterdam without having to get on a plane just by waking up a little bit earlier, right? Like it's, or
yep.
staying up later depending on what time zone you're in. It's fantastic to be able to have those relationships a little bit more closely now that we know how to do it better. Great,
Well,
great
and
advice.
it's nice too, to just to end on a note, like, we are more than just our careers. So we all have more to us, and even if digital forensics and incident response is your passion, like it is for so many of us, there's more to you. So just don't let those parts go, and know that other people share those things too. And it's good to talk about, things outside of the case. So it keeps you human, and it keeps you from burning out. Don't burn out.
100%. That is such great advice, and thank you for sharing so much, not just about what you do in digital forensics and how you got here, but about you and about your passions and your cats and your snails,
Yep.
and really showing the human side of DFIR and the reliance and connection that's necessary with other humans. Thank you so much.
Oh no, thank you. I could talk to you for hours. So,
Thank you so much, Heather. Really have loved having you on today. And if you've missed any other episodes of Cash Up and you want to catch up on those and see talks with everybody from Brett Shavers to David Cohen to Alyssa Torres that we've had before, you can check out the resources page on magnetforensics.com. And really excited about next week, where I'll be joined by Tara Melton. And then following weeks followed by great people like Alexis Brignoni, Joshua Hickman, Richie Cyrus, Cindy Murphy, Trey Amick, Elon Wright, or Dia for Diva, James Duffy, Devin Ackerman, and Ladrina Sharon. So really, really cool lineup coming up. Thank you so much to my fantabulous guest today, Heather Smith. And I hope you all have a great day. Thanks, everyone.